Okay, we are live. We are trying something new today. It's called the Barnes Briefing Book. I'm going to share my screen now. Here we go. Starting a new section here. It's called Boom or Bust. What pandemic era prices look like in 2025. We're going to look at a house that sold for more than it sold. So we're going to look at a price. You're looking to look at two houses. Each house sold in 2021, 2022. And then it sold again this year in 2025. One house sold for more than it did in the peak, and one house sold for less than it did in the peak. And we're going to look at both houses and see why that might have happened. So the first house we're going to look at now is 100 Ardwald Gate. This is a beautiful house in the South Hill area. Very desirable street. It sold for I'm gonna share this screen right now so you can see it. It sold for $8.5 million in 2022, in June of 2022. Very nice house, very prestigious street, 4 beds, 7 baths, wonderful house. And it was listed for $9 million, sold for 94% of list price. So a good sale. That was, not the peak of the market. We were just past the peak, I would say. The peak was February 2022. This was June, but still a very good time in the market, I would say. Now it just sold again this month, and it had been on the market for months, and it started over what they bought it for because they've invested some money in it. It sounded like over $1.5 million into the property. And here is the most recent sale this month, $7,150,000. So a nice drop from when it sold previously. Now, there's a few reasons for this. Obviously, the market is not what it was in 21 and 22. Why might this have sold for so much less? Well, in my opinion, it's a couple factors. Those peak years push prices beyond the fundamentals, and the luxury segment is definitely more discretionary. There are fewer buyers for those houses in 2025, and those buyers also could be more discerning. So things like a lot that sides onto a busier street like this one, people look past that stuff when prices were hot, whereas now they're looking at it, through now they have more to choose from. So if one lot is a perfect 50 by 150 in the middle of the street with, it's a very quiet part, they've got that option, versus then they were just trying to snap up anything they could. This house on Ardwald sides onto Spadina, and it's on a bit of a strange lot. The orientation's not exactly right. So that one sold for a considerable amount less if you also consider the improvements that the seller put in. So it sold for 16% less, but no, that's not even including the $1.7 million that they made in luxury upgrades. Now we're going to look at a house that sold for more in 2025 than it did in 21 and 22. 248 Terrell Avenue. I will bring up here is the listing in 2021. So this was May of 2021. This house sold for $1,570,000. It's a detached house, which is very desirable in that neighborhood. There's a lot of semi-detached houses in that neighborhood. It's in a good school district. It's in McBurke School District. It is in Winona School District. It's close to Oakwood School District. It's, your walk to St. Clair. You can jump on the streetcar. You have all those great shops and restaurants on St. Clair West. Very desirable neighborhood. Nice looking house. The previous listing had taken all the pictures down, which is actually a no-no these days. But it didn't look like the seller had done much in the way of upgrading. Wasn't sharing that. Here is this property on Terrell, 248 Terrell. So 1,570, and it sold for that in May of 2021. So now let's look at what it sold for this month, 2025, November. 1,678,000. So that's a decent jump, considering the market. You hear the market's so bad, the market's so bad. Now this one has the pictures. It's a nice looking house, but again, if you look at the floors, they're not upgraded. You can see they've put this nice big area rug in here to show you that, to try to cover up the older floors. The kitchen is still the closed off galley kitchen. It's got the old granite, nice enough appliances, but again, not a renovated house by any means. And it sold for more than it did in those peak times. This was definitely sold in the peak for more. So why might that have been? Well, I think there's always a demand for great neighborhoods and great school districts. This Witchwood area is always highly in demand, especially a detached house for under 2 million. It was move-in ready, and it was very walkable, a very walkable house. So all this to say, sometimes the micro markets outperform the broader Toronto MLS trends. So you really have to have a handle on what's going on in your specific markets, because your market in Etobicoke and the Kingsway might be very different than what's going on in Scarborough out by the Hunt Club. They totally different. So again, not all the segments move together. Real estate's very, very micro. Pandemic era pricing. I mean, I'll keep doing these so you can see some of the stark examples of how crazy some of the prices went and how some of them dropped, because we have seen people that unfortunately have had to sell for a loss for whatever reason from their peak price. So there's definitely a lot of examples of houses that have sold for less. So I will continue to show these, but juxtaposed to some houses that have actually done okay from the peaks when they were purchased. Now I'm actually going to talk about two sales that we had this week. 218 Queens Quay, 2202. We had that listed for a few months. We started out at around $1.1 million. We were now at $1,040,000. This was a great unit. It was upgraded from the builder, real hardwood floors, lake view with a balcony, very, very nice layout, 2 bedrooms. And that was on for $1.040 million, as I mentioned, which is a great price per foot. Unfortunately, we had a competitor just above us, which was basically the same unit, just one floor above. And we were kind of chasing each other down the market. So we had started at $1.1 million. They dropped, then we dropped to $1.040 million. Then they just dropped to $999,000, which wasn't great for us. However, we got an offer this week. We negotiated. It's conditional. We're still conditional on financing and status, but it is sold conditionally now, which is great. All that it was concerning that the other one had dropped, and we were sort of plotting our next move, whether we were going to have to follow suit. So it was great to get that offer coming in when it did. And there's negotiation with condos right now. There's just that expectation now that there's negotiating on most condos these days. The other one, and actually, I'll pull that up so you can see it. Here's the condo, 218 Queens Quay, 2202. There's the lobby. Again, some of these pictures, this picture was virtually staged. I think they do a great job with that these days. But the seller had the condo looking great, totally painted, beautiful view. It was a really lovely unit. This picture I probably could have done away with. Made the hallway look slightly narrow. But anyway, so this was a great value, and this is now sold conditionally this week. The other listing that we have that's sold conditional this week is 18 Rossburn, which is a bungalow in Etobicoke on a 50-foot lot. 50 by 105 for $899. Now this is a very aggressive price in that Etobicoke area, W8, for a detached property. You want to talk about pandemic pricing? This property in the pandemic would have sold for well above $1 million, in my opinion. However, because it required quite a bit of work, I believe there's fewer builders out there that are willing to, willing to get into an offer date scenario these days to push the price up on a house like this. So it's going to take someone that wants to invest a lot of money, and most likely is going to be an end user. We also looked at it in terms of a teardown. There are fewer builders out there that are looking at teardowns to build a spec house on. I thought it might be a good house for a builder that's looking to build rentals. You could put a fourplex on this property quite easily. However, we didn't have any builders of fourplexes looking at it, even though we reached out to a few of them. So this was a property that had just sold conditionally. We had an offer date and it did not sell on the offer date. So that leads me to my next topic, which is, should you hold offers in today's market? In my opinion on condos, I would not. You would have to price it at such an aggressive, eye-popping price, and you would have to have, a very desirable building in order to do well on an offer date with condos. So, in my opinion, with condos, price at market or slightly below, but don't hold offers and take offers as they come. Negotiation is the norm right now, and make sure if you're getting if you're having a long closing, make sure you get a good deposit on the offer. At least 5%. And then in terms of a house like Rossburn, as I mentioned, should you hold offers on that? Generally, that would be a house that would be a no-brainer for an offer date scenario. However, again, because there was fewer builders out there, fewer people looking for that kind of product, there wasn't that fervor to push the market up. However, if you're in a neighborhood like Roncesvalles, Leslieville, or even in Etobicoke, in that $1.5 million and under range, in a house that's move-in or just dated, but you could move into it, you're probably still fine doing an offer date. This house, unfortunately, most people saw it as a teardown or a major project. And this actually brought me to my to the next topic here. Should you keep showing a house after it's sold and sold conditionally? And I always say yes. Until the deal's firm, you don't have a deal. The deal might fall through due to financing issues, status certificate, inspection concerns, what have you. So I always allow other agents to show the listing even after the house is sold conditional. I've had other people, if a deal is wobbly or if it doesn't work out, it's great to have someone there as a backup if the first deal falls apart. So absolutely continue to show that house even after the property is sold conditionally. Until it firms up, keep showing it. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is how the November 2025 numbers will look, in my opinion. I'm going to pull up here. This is the October 2025 numbers. Again, I've talked about this before, but you saw sales were down, significantly, almost 10%. And I think we're going to see that again in November because, again, November seasonally is a month that slows down. But when I looked at the sales from October to November, they were down significantly. So I think you'll see sales down again year over year. I think you'll see prices, they were down 7.2% year over year in October. I could see a similar trend, possibly closer to 5% down. Days on market, definitely higher days on market from last year. It was 31 days in October. I could see a similar days on market or even slightly higher in the November stats, which should be coming out in about a week. So The other section that I always keep an eye on is the average price of a detached home. So it was 1,619,000 in October 2025. That's one to always keep an eye out for, because if you go back to let me just go back here. September. So these are the September 2025 numbers. The detached price in 416 was down from September to October. So this is something that a stat that I always like to keep an eye on, because this is sort of the the gold standard of Toronto real estate is detached homes and how they're doing. They always are the most desirable. So it's obviously an interesting trend to keep an eye on. In September it was interesting because the sales bumped up. It was a good September for sales. It was up 8.5% year over year, and the price was down just under 5%. So, I could see November looking more like October than September. I could see us down a considerable amount in sales year over year and an average price. So, if you have any questions about the market, please feel free to reach out. And happy to do this again once a week and just dive into the numbers and everything having to do with the market and anything I find interesting about the market.